There are tales told throughout human history that are almost too terrifying to believe. These stories have haunted generations and inspired frightening fictional works. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the life of one of history's most infamous women, Elizabeth Bathory, or as you may know her, the Blood Countess. She is remembered for torturing and murdering hundreds of young girls throughout the 16th century. But is her gruesome story really true, or could this be yet another tale of historical injustice? I'll leave that for you to decide as we explore the horrifying legend of the Blood Countess. Elizabeth Báthory was born in August 1560 into one of Hungary's most powerful and influential families. The Bathory family's reach extended throughout Hungary, Transylvania, and Poland. Elizabeth's parents, Baron George Bathory VI and Baroness Anna Bathory, both came from a powerful lineage of prominent nobles and royals. Elizabeth's uncle, Stephen Bathory, was the Prince of Transylvania who later became King of Poland. As a child, young Elizabeth resided in 𝖘𝖊𝖉𝖎 Castle with her parents and siblings. Elizabeth was offered the highest quality education and was said to be quite intelligent. Unfortunately, despite Elizabeth's noble birth and the life of luxury she was afforded, her early years were far from easy. She suffered from seizures, likely caused by epilepsy, a condition that was not well understood during her lifetime. The available treatments were primitive and barbaric, often including bizarre remedies that only worsened her condition. Despite her health issues, Elizabeth's intellect was evident, and she was speaking multiple languages by the time she'd reached her teenage years. At the age of 13, Elizabeth was betrothed to Count Ferenc Nászady, who was also a powerful Hungarian noble born into an affluent family. The marriage of Elizabeth and Ferenc served to solidify political ties and increase the influence of both families, granting both additional land ownership and power. These arranged marriages were commonplace for nobles and royals during this era of history. The pair were wed 2 years later in 1575. Ferenc's family gifted the newlyweds Castle 𝖕𝖠, which was formerly owned by King Maximilian II, and this became Elizabeth's new home. When her husband was called away to fight the invading Ottomans, Elizabeth was left to manage their estates and defend their land. Elizabeth was no ordinary noblewoman. She readily took on the responsibilities of leadership, even protecting her estates from Ottoman attacks. By 1585, Elizabeth and Ferenc had their first child, Anna. Over the years, they had at least 5 children, though there were likely others who died in infancy. Sadly, Ferenc passed away in 1604, allegedly as a result of a long-term illness that had rendered him disabled. Following her husband's death, the rumors of Elizabeth's cruelty were brought out of the darkness. Whispers of cruelty had circulated about Elizabeth for years, but in 1609, accusations surfaced that could no longer be ignored. Previous rumors insisted that Elizabeth had murdered peasant girls, but these new allegations implicated Elizabeth in the deaths of women of noble birth. A Lutheran minister, 𝖒𝖊𝖉𝖎𝖆, publicly denounced Elizabeth. He brought the claims against Elizabeth before the court in Vienna. While the deaths of peasants were more commonly dismissed, deaths of noblewomen drew public attention. King Matthias II ordered an investigation into Elizabeth's misdeeds. It was none other than 𝖘𝖔𝖈𝖎𝖆, Elizabeth's cousin and the one entrusted by the late Ferenc to protect his wife and children, that was called to lead the inquiry. The investigation led to shocking testimonies. Witnesses claimed that Elizabeth had tortured young women in horrific ways, forcing them to take ice baths in the middle of winter, covering them in honey and leaving them to be devoured by insects, and even claims that Elizabeth personally burned and terribly mutilated their bodies. Hundreds of statements were collected during the investigation. On New Year's Eve in 1610, 𝖘𝖔𝖈𝖎𝖆 and his entourage stormed Castle 𝖕𝖠 without warning. Elizabeth and 4 of her servants were arrested. The testimonies they had gathered painted a clear picture of unspeakable horror. During the trial, some claimed that Elizabeth had murdered over 650 young women, though this number originally came from one servant who claimed to have seen it in one of Elizabeth's journals. Despite the stories, all the evidence against Elizabeth was circumstantial at best. The vast majority of the claims came from secondhand accounts or rumors, not actual eyewitness statements. In addition, no formal complaints had ever been filed against Elizabeth, despite written complaints being made for even the smallest of grievances. The servants that had been arrested alongside Elizabeth did testify against her and admit to being accomplices, but this came after they had been brutally tortured into confessing. This was hardly a fair or just trial, if it can even be considered a trial at all. 3 of the 4 servants captured with Elizabeth were executed in gruesome ways. The 4th allegedly escaped and was later recaptured, but her eventual fate was never confirmed. Elizabeth's family tried their best to quiet the public backlash, but the rumors of the Blood Countess spread faster than they could contain them. The family had originally planned to quietly send the disgraced Elizabeth to live out her days as a nun, but the public outcry was too much to bear. Fearing they might lose their claim to Elizabeth's estates and power, the family resolved to imprison her within her own home. Elizabeth was confined to permanent imprisonment in 𝖘𝖔𝖈𝖎𝖆, where she remained until her death in 1614. While Elizabeth's bloody legacy has fascinated generations, many scholars today question the validity of the claims made against her. Was Elizabeth Báthory truly the monster that history remembers, or was she a victim of political conspiracy? Elizabeth was a powerful, wealthy, and strong woman in a time period where such women were often viewed as a threat. Elizabeth was a bit of a rebel, and sources say that she was not quite as committed to the church as her family claimed to be. She was known to bring young women to her castle and provide them with education they'd not otherwise be able to receive. Some say Elizabeth was a book smuggler and book printer, and she maintained an impressive private library. Could Elizabeth have ruffled enough feathers to make herself a target? It's also worth mentioning that King Matthias II, the one who ordered the investigation, allegedly owed Elizabeth a considerable debt, which was conveniently erased after her arrest. After 𝖕𝖉𝖎𝖎's death, Elizabeth became the sole owner of all their land, making her that much more wealthy and powerful. Many surrounding Elizabeth, especially her family, stood to gain fortune and influence with the Countess dethroned. Then there's the obvious, which is the sham nature of her trial. The testimonies were scarcely more than hearsay, and the confessions from her accomplices were extracted through brutal torture. Elizabeth's story was certainly sensationalized, as even today, many believe that she bathed in the blood of virgins, which was never mentioned or referenced at any point during the trial or investigation. Was Elizabeth Báthory the victim of a 16th century witch hunt? Cambridge University's Dr. 𝖒𝖊𝖉𝖎𝖆 Bailey believes so. Dr. Bailey, who has spent many years dedicated to researching Elizabeth's life, firmly believes that Elizabeth was framed. Considering the lack of any real evidence, the tortured confessions, and the fact that there were many powerful people that would benefit from Elizabeth's downfall, it's not a far stretch to consider this a possibility. With so much time passed, it's impossible to say what truly transpired, but it's difficult to ignore the possibility that Elizabeth Báthory was not the bloodthirsty monster that history remembers. It's very likely, even probable, that the tales of the Blood Countess were no more than a targeted smear campaign designed to remove an educated and affluent woman from power, which turned her into a monster in the eyes of history. Do you believe Elizabeth Báthory was innocent, or was she really the horrific villain she was made out to be? Scholars still argue this point, and the debate will continue for years to come. Let us know your thoughts by leaving a comment on one of our posts. We will likely never know the full truth, but one thing is certain. The story of the Blood Countess will forever remain in infamy as yet another tale from the underworld.